Welcome to the Lancaster Patriot Podcast. My name is Chris Hume, the managing editor of the Lancaster Patriot. I'm joined today by Joel Saint, pastor of Independence Reformed Bible Church. Joel, thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me once again.
And Luke Saint, chairman of the Mid-Atlantic Reformation Society and author of the book, The Sound Doctrine of Theocracy. Luke, thanks for coming in again.
And thanks for having me again too, Chris.
All right, well, today let's first recap a little bit of the Mid-Atlantic Reformation Society's conference that happened over the weekend. The Future of Christendom 2023, the Gospel at War was Friday, Saturday, and then Sunday morning service there at Spooky Nook Sports. Joel, what was your overall impression of the conference?
You know, one of the things that we're getting a lot of kudos on, if you will, is that it actually ran on time. We had, 12 exposition talks on Saturday. Yeah, get my days straight here, on Saturday. So you would think you'd run way over time with 12 different speakers actually speaking 18 minutes long. And wow, I mean, it went like clockwork, which is exciting. One of the things thanks
to Luke, the chairman.
Yeah, Chairman Luke kept things going, right?
It
Luke?
was not me.
And anyway, that was good because one thing that can happen in a conference like this is you start to get a little bit late, and after a while you just lose people when you do that. So I was excited about that. I was thrilled with the exposition speakers that really brought it home. Chris, you did a great job. In fact, Chris, I talked to someone who said that yours was his second favorite talk out of all the 12 talks of the exposition talks. The first one that he said was the Gospel at War with feminism. I've already heard someone say that the Mid-Atlantic Reformation Society Future of Christendom Conference in 2024 is in trouble because we're not going to be able to come up with a better title than the Gospel at War. So that person liked it. I've heard people say it exceeded their expectations. The debate, the debate, which is what brought a lot of people in on Saturday evening, which essentially was a question of is gay Christian an acceptable designation for a member, or biblical designation, if you will, for a member of Christ's church.
Biblically acceptable.
A biblically acceptable designation, right? A biblically acceptable designation for a member of Christ's church. That I thought could have gone better. It was. I felt like there was a lot of fuzziness. We got talking about Greek terms for maybe half hour's worth of the debate. And a lot of us out there are not Greek scholars, if you will. Now, I will admit I looked up some Greek words while I was listening to the debate, but that's not what it was about. What it was about was, can you call yourself a gay Christian and still be a member in good standing of the Biblical Church of Christ? And I felt we did not get a clear answer to that question.
Okay. Yeah, let's talk about that a little bit. I know we might try to revisit another time. I'm not sure if Luke's going to be able to be here for that one. So I did want to just talk about it. Of course, much appreciation for Dr. White for coming in and doing the debate. I think it was his 182nd debate or so.
Yeah.
So
and he came way out of his way.
Yeah, way out of his way. And he certainly knows what he's doing up there. And it's easy after the fact to armchair quarterback on debates. But
everybody's an expert.
But that's also half the fun of the debate. So let's talk a little bit about it. The debate, it was Gregory Cole's first debate, apparently.
He said. Yeah.
And so Luke, what were your thoughts on the debate?
Well, it was tame, that's for sure. It was very tame, and that's not necessarily a bad thing when you're talking about a debate. Dr. White was clearly doing the right thing in that he didn't come off as the temptation is to judge the debate by how people. What kind of manners they had, what their mannerisms were, who's the level-headed, calm, cool, and collected one, and a lot of debates are won or lost by that standard. And Dr. White, I think back to, if you remember, the voice of Saruman, right? The voice of Saruman in the Lord of the Rings, when they confronted him, he had this voice that was soothing and pleasing, and if you weren't of strong will, you would eventually think that his most crazy ideas made sense because his voice had this magical quality to it that convinced you of whatever it was he said. And in comparison, the people who were saying the right thing, they sounded like these angry, crotchety old, people. Everything that they said was, even though it was the right thing, and even though it made sense, what they said was always a bad idea compared to Saruman's good ideas. So I'm thankful that Dr. White didn't fall for that trap, because Dr. Coles definitely came off as, calm, cool, and collected, and the level-headed one in the beginning. And Dr. White didn't come off as the angry, like, oh, you're gay and I know it, just say it, that kind of a thing. I'm glad he didn't, because I mean, in the reality, I think, of the situation, that would have affected his message. So I'm glad he didn't do that, but I am a little disappointed that he was a little too nice. In my opinion, the term was used. Some friends of mine were using, is he handled him with kid gloves a little bit. He didn't trap him, and I think he had a responsibility to trap him. He didn't get him down to like yes or no. I want to hear answer this question, yes or no. He didn't pursue the sexual perversion question. Is gay Christian? I mean, because the reason we're having this debate is not because this has very little to do with the Bible. This has everything to do with society saying it's okay to be a homosexual. That's why we're having this debate. That's 100% of the reason. Has nothing to do with the Bible. In
other words, it's nothing to do with the Bible in terms of the Bible opens the door to this.
Right.
The door has been opened by society, not by the Bible.
It's not like people are studying the Bible and saying, "Oh, maybe we should include this
as
an identity."
Never saw this before.
It's a reaction to the
right. This is because the world has said it's okay. That's why we're having this discussion. So I'm disappointed that Dr. White, didn't corner him on this. Okay. The question is gay Christian a biblically acceptable identity for a member of Christ's church? Okay. Is a pedophilic Christian biblically, because both are sexual perversions? Yes. Right. But they're both sexual perversions. And, all of Dr. Cole's arguments, if you were just swap in pedophile, they all fall apart. Anytime he says gay or homosexual, just swap in pedophile. And it all falls apart instantly
because socially that's not acceptable.
It's not acceptable.
Yeah, for now it falls apart. For now.
But that's one of the reasons why we have this debate. We know the Christians are still. Many Christians are still trying to cut off sexual perversion at the knees. Unfortunately, the pagans and the false church are they got very strong knees. Let's just put it that way. But I am disappointed that Dr. White didn't trap him on anything. And like as you said, Dad, earlier, like I want to hear an answer to this. No, I don't want to hear the. Well, I understand it differently. I want to hear an answer to this question. He didn't trap him. I've talked to people and I've heard people's testimony. Well, Dr. White clearly won and all that kind of stuff. That's all well and good. I thought Dr. White carried the debate biblically. Because at the end of it, Dr. Coles was not appealing to Scripture. He was appealing to his understanding. This is how I understand it. But Dr. White was not appealing to, this is my understanding of, this is how I understand it. He was appealing to the actual words of Scripture. But I was a little disappointed that he didn't corner him, he didn't trap him.
There was a time there at the end when Dr. Cole said, well, I have a friend, a young lady, and she wanted to change her gender with surgery, right? And then this is what he said. She had an experience with Jesus and decided not to do that. Oh man, that's the time to jump in and say, what kind of experience with Jesus did she have? And did that experience with Jesus preclude her from doing that? Or could she have an experience with Jesus and do it anyway? But we just didn't get that. You know what it sounded like to me? It sounded like we're having this discussion to continue the discussion. And I'm thinking about a lot of the discussions that Christ had. I'm thinking of discussions, Old Testament prophets. I'm thinking of Book of Acts. I'm thinking of Christ in his discussions, and he had a lot of very public debates. And was he dancing? Was he like, well, the important thing is that we all get along here and that we continue the discussion? Or was it more like, you know what, when this is done, there's going to be one side standing and one side not? That is where I'm coming from, and on this point. And I've seen Dr. White debate like that before, which is one of the reasons why we wanted him to come and do this debate. In this debate, it was more like, if we're both standing at the end of this, then something good has happened today. Do you disagree with that, Luke? Or
I for those who love God's word and are properly, I'll say this carefully, but are properly exegeting the scriptures, there's no confusion about the message that Dr. White was sending. He had his points. He just, he made a lot of the good points. He just didn't trap him. He just didn't corner him. He let him slip away too many times. He should have cornered him with the sexual perversion question about pedophilia, because that's coming next. In 20 years we'll have a debate saying, well, I just have an attraction for children. I was born with it. I can't do anything about it. What do you think I should do about my attraction for children, all that kind of stuff. And I was a little disappointed because in Dr. White's, he wasn't clear. I think it was reading between the lines, but he wasn't clear. And his assessment of the debate afterwards, he came out and was more clear about this, because it's not enough for us to identify the problem. We've got to identify the solution. And when Coles was basically admitting, in my opinion, admitting defeat, when he said, it wasn't like this decisive, like, oh, I lost, but in reading between the lines, he's admitting defeat by asking Dr. White, what should I do? Mm-hmm. What should I do? What do you want me to do? What do you want me to do about this? Okay, all right. I see your point, but what do you want me to do? I can't do anything about it. And I think Dr. White, in his response, he wasn't very clear. He should have said, he should have said what he said in his assessment. You need to be cultivating desires that are consistent with biblical revelation. A guy who fornicates a lot before he gets married is going to have a difficult time finding a biblically faithful marriage attractive. He just is, because he's going to be thinking about all the fornication he's done before, and one woman's just not going to be enough. A man who's addicted to pornography before he gets married is going to find it difficult to find a biblically faithful marriage attractive. He's going to be thinking about all the pornography he used to do. A guy who struggles with, same-sex attraction, if he does get married, he's going to find it difficult to be faithful to his wife. Okay, so when we come to the marriage with these sexual perversions, we find it difficult to find God's plan attractive. We find the world's plan or perversion attractive. And Dr. White articulated that in his assessment of the debate, but he didn't say it clearly when Dr. Cole said, what do you want me to do? He should have said, and again, this is, armchair quarterbacking the whole thing. But it's there if you look for it, but it wasn't very clear. We all have a responsibility to find God's plan for our lives attractive, to cultivate those desires. And he said this about Rosario Butterfield. We have a responsibility to okay, here's God's revelation. Here's God's plan for marriage. Here's what God is telling you is sexually mature. We have a responsibility to cultivate that maturity in our lives. Even if we find something else attractive, we have a responsibility to mortify that desire, as I was talking about with Matt Ware, because he wanted to ask that question. Do we ever okay, well, good, but you have a same-sex attraction. Do we have a responsibility to mortify that same-sex attraction? Dr. Cole's unequivocal answer was no, I don't. And I think Dr. White's answer was yes, you do. Okay, but we didn't get to that part. We didn't get to that part like, okay, it's down to brass tacks. What's the responsibility? You have a responsibility to mortify that attraction and find what God has told you to do attractive.
Actually, Cole said the opposite of that, because he was asked at one point if you could take a pill to get rid of your and he said like, no, he wouldn't. No, and in fact, he's arguing the whole time they didn't choose it, and then at that point he said he is
right,
or he would.
Yeah, and his whole point is, well, there's benefits to me because I can serve my sisters better. I submit to you, no.
Man,
I submit to you,
Luke,
no.
I would have taken off on that.
I submit to you, no.
Dr. White asked a good question. You identify with the LGBT trans community, and he says, well, yeah, that allows me to minister to them. I wish Dr. White would have said to me, it was a softball the size of a beach ball, right? Are you a murderer? Well, how if you're not, then how can you possibly minister to murderers?
Yeah, exactly.
What?
Yeah, right. So again,
missed opportunities.
Yeah, there were a lot of missed opportunities, but we have a desire, and this is what something the church doesn't. Something that the church struggles with. We have a responsibility to deprogram perverse desires that we either other people put in front of us or that we put in front of ourselves. We find perversion attractive. We have a responsibility to find God's plan attractive. And the question, this was a great opportunity here. The question with Dr. Cole said, well, do you think that a couple, a mature couple, can get to that point, a man can get to that point where he finds marital unfaithfulness unattractive? Do you think he can do that? And I was like, oh my goodness, this is a great opportunity. The answer is unequivocally yes. Yes. There have been many relationships, and Dr. White said this, there have been many relationships where men have been so faithful to the wife and so faithful to God that at the end of their life, to cheat on their wife, to dwell on sexual perversion is unattractive because they cultivated this maturity inside themselves. So eventually, where they find, he said this too. It doesn't mean they're perfect, but it does mean that they find sexual perversion unattractive, and we all have a responsibility to cultivate that. And yes, if you find yourself calling yourself a gay Christian, you have a responsibility to cultivate godly desires and mortify that wicked desire, and you can do it. And that was what Dr. White was saying. You can do it. Such were some of you in 1 Corinthians 6. So I think, in Dr. White's response to when Dr. Cole said, what should I do? I wish Dr. White was a little more clear, because he was clear in his assessment. But I wish he was a little more clear. You have a responsibility. And I actually read, did you guys read Dr. Cole's book?
No.
Okay, I read his book, but
Single Gay and Christian?
Single Gay Christian. I realized reading through the book that this man does not identify with men at all. Does not identify with men. He complains that when he goes to men's Bible studies, the men are like, after the Bible study is over, like, we all have a nice worship service, which Dr. Cole very much identifies with, leading worship service and all that kind of stuff, and worshiping and hands raised and all that kind of stuff. He when they get in line for food, the guys start talking about sports, the guys start talking about cars, the guys start talking about hunting, and he complains in his book that I don't find those conversations attractive. I can't talk with them. I can't talk with men. When it's just me and the guys, I don't relate to them at all. I feel like, I'm putting words in his mouth now, but I believe this was the message he was sending. I feel like, I'm uncomfortable just being in a room full of guys because I can't talk to them. And the problem is that Dr. Coles identifies more with women than he does with men. That's the problem. And that desire, that identity, he says in his book, well, I had a normal childhood and I was never abused. I submit to you, no one who has a same-sex desire had a normal childhood 100%. There was a time when you stopped identifying, somebody in your life turned you off to identifying with men. Somewhere, somehow. As a child, you stopped identifying with men and you started identifying with women. And I'm going to give everyone an example here. When a child is growing up, at some point he or she starts to identify with the appropriate sex. A male identifies with men and a female identifies with women, right? As a child. I'm not sure what the age is. I think it's around like 12 months or something like that, between like 12 and 18 months, I think. But they start identifying, okay, dad, okay, as a boy, okay, dad, okay, I identify with him. Okay, I'm like him. He's like me. I'm going to identify with him. And a female, I'm going to identify with mom. For the women, it's easier to identify with mom because they're always with mom. They don't need to break away from mom. They're always with mom. So it's easy to go right on. They're always around mom. So it's easy to go right on identifying with mom. For a male, it's more difficult. They have an extra psychological step to endure because the male at some point, since he's always with mom, the temptation is to identify with mom. But he's got to break himself off from identifying with mom and start identifying with dad. And if there's no dad around, he goes on identifying with mom. Now, is that like a guarantee? Oh, your life is ruined and now you're going to be homosexual? No. But it's an extra step that he has to overcome, an unnecessary psychological step that this child has to overcome, because eventually he's got to start identifying with men. That's part of a healthy sexual maturity. Men have to identify with men. And if you as a child are find yourself not identifying with men, that is emotionally unhealthy, and it could lead to big problems down the road, as it has with Dr. Coles. He does not identify with men. Somewhere in his life, he stopped identifying with men. And when he said, I was a missionary kid, I was like, oh, I know where this is going. I know exactly where this is going. Heard this one a million times. He's a missionary kid, and he's not identifying with dad and what dad considers manly. And I'm not going to, armchair psychology, the whole thing to death. But I have been around the block before. I've heard this one before. I know how this one ends. And, he sounds like he talks positively about his dad. He still talks with his dad, but he doesn't identify with his father. And that's a huge problem in Dr. Cole's life. He doesn't identify with men. And he needs to. He needs to identify with men. And until he does, he's not going to be able to combat that perversion that he identifies men with a sexual desire now. That's the perverse part.
Well, you don't believe in creation. You believe in evolution. And you know what? I guess a man like Dr. Coles can sort of evolve into a woman, right? Sort of, kind of here. The Bible tells us that God created man and woman. Mm-hmm. That's how he created us from the very beginning. Well, if God the Creator created us that way, then it is our responsibility to explore exactly what that means. And he starts out with be fruitful and multiply, which is a most basic beginning point of your manhood and your womanhood. I mean, that is definitely one place to definitely start. You and I were talking about this earlier, Luke, and for me at least, I see it this way. We talked about the Rocky movie, the first one, and Rocky, he says at the beginning of it, says he just wants to go. I just want to go 10 rounds with him, or 12 rounds, or whatever it is, right? And for him, that was a win. To just go, he's a rookie boxer. He's gone up against a guy who's who's been a tremendous boxer all his life. He's a champion. And Rocky's saying, if I can just hang with him for those 10 or 12 rounds or whatever it is, I will consider that a victory. That is why I consider it, on some level, a win for Dr. Coles. Because he hung, and Dr. Coles,
he survived.
He survived it, yeah. And he made it really clear from the very beginning. Hey, this is my first debate. I don't know if it is or not, but okay, this is my first debate. Hey, I'm just kind of new at this. Kind of like I just popped out of the eggshell, looking around, seeing what the world's like, debate world's like. Oh, I'm up against a guy who's had over 100 debates. Oh, let's see how this is going to go. He's setting us up so that all he has to do is survive, and he did. He did survive.
Yeah, one of the things Shaq said was, that's not a way to start a debate where, I forget how Dr. Cole said it, but he's just like, I'm so happy to be here and this is great. We're just going to have, a little discussion. Like, no, this is supposed to be, your position is wrong and mine's right.
Mm-hmm. Right.
That's the way Christ debated.
Yeah.
That's the way Paul debated. That's the way the prophets debated.
Yeah, and Dr. White didn't start that. That's how Dr. Coles presented it. And
Dr. White did not do that.
I think one of the main points is, he could have been a little harder on him. But
I would agree that Dr. White made a lot of debate points. If I could say it this way, I think Dr. White won debate point after debate point after debate point. Mm-hmm. The overall debate, I think, was actually won by Dr. Coles.
All right. Well, maybe we'll have a chance to revisit and play some of the clips. We're not going to do that today. Any final thoughts on the debate or the conference before we move on?
Well, the conference was absolutely wonderful. I'm so glad that so many people showed up. We got to meet
a lot of new people.
A lot of new people. Praise the Lord, and thanks again to Chris Arnzen and Dr. White for advertising, because a lot of people that I talked to heard about the debate, this whole thing from Iron Sharpens Iron, and a lot of people heard about it from Alpha and Omega Ministries. So they helped us a lot, and praise the Lord. That's why, I mean, that's one of the reasons why we wanted to do this. I mean, in addition to equipping the saints, but we also wanted to, advertise, the Future of Christendom Conference and the Mid-Atlantic Reformation Society, and what we're trying to do here in the Mid-Atlantic area, to be honest. I'm so glad I met all these new people, was able to talk to them, and were you able to sell some of your books, Chris?
Yeah.
I praise the Lord for that. We got Chris's book out there. I'm so glad for
Seven
that.
status sins.
Seven
right?
status sins, baby.
Oh, only 7.
Yeah.
Only 7. I'm waiting. You done with the audiobook on that, by the way?
Not yet.
I'm waiting on, pins and needles, man. The conference, it went really well. We were on time. Probably because we gave ourselves so much extra time. A lot of times we even started late and ended early. So a lot of the speakers, all the speakers did a good job. Nobody went over time. Everyone, they all kept it within the time limit. Yeah. And a lot of great presentations. Chris, your presentation kept coming up over and over again with my friends that it was their favorite presentation. So, I mean, just great job on that, by the way. If you get the opportunity, we're going to put it up soon, but, check out our YouTube page and you'll see Chris's presentation on the gospel at war with the yellow bus, which was a smashing presentation. But I thought the whole thing was a smashing success.
And you can see the debate actually up on our YouTube
yeah.
page now. Yeah. Just one more thing to say about the debate, and that was that Greg Coles was not going to fake anybody out that actually believes the Bible. That was, he did not appeal to the scriptures after a while at all. It was all like his feelings and his friends that had feelings and so forth. Mm-hmm. So it's not going to work with them.
Yeah.
So Dr. White did well with that. It's just
he didn't corner him. That's the problem. He didn't corner him.
He just didn't. It was like you kept weaseling his way out of any kind of potential corner. I thought Dr. White's issue of covetous was excellent because in covetous,
in the cross examinations he didn't corner him on it.
I know. I was like, oh man, please do it.
Corner him.
Yeah, and that's so easy because Luke, that's the 10 Commandments, right? In other words, in 10 Commandments, you're not allowed to covet. Okay, now you're inside someone's head. And God knows everything, and He's allowed to get inside my head. He is the one that created me, and He says you cannot covet your neighbor's stuff. And a lot of it is unique to your neighbors. Your neighbor's, for example, his house. It's unique to him. His servant, his wife. All that is unique, right? But in the earlier commandments, we have the action. So you can't say, well, it's only the action. We have don't kill, don't commit adultery, don't bear false witness. All those happen because you've coveted somehow earlier on. The coveting precedes the killing and the adultery and so forth. And man, that would have been, it seems to me, just a classic. No. Over here, you're not allowed to do these actions. But over here in the 10th commandment, you're not allowed to have these thoughts.
Right, which is a great point by Dr. White, but he just didn't corner him on it, and that's my only critique is that Dr. White, I believe, was mature. I believe he was patient. I believe he was kind, which is all well and good, but he just didn't corner him, and I wish he would have. That's my only critique.
Is cornering a person not patient, not kind?
I'm referring to his attitude that he had a responsibility to not appear crotchety because he was speaking to a much younger person, tactically speaking. So tactically he did very well, in that regard. But tactically, in a debate, you have a responsibility to corner your opponent, and he never cornered him.
All right. Well, much more we could say on that. Again, very thankful to Dr. White and Dr. Coles for coming in.
What did you think about the debate, Chris?
I'm still digesting it. I really am. And it's interesting to hear both your thoughts. And I want to watch the whole thing again and listen to it again, and then maybe analyze it again. To be honest, I'm still taking it in. But I agree with a lot of things both of you have said here. So.
I think my view is a minority view. I think most people that I are hearing from was like, no, it was very good. Dr. White did what he had to do. So I think my view is a minority view.
Yeah. I mean, like I said, it's easy to armchair quarterback, but I do agree. I would have been nice. And maybe Dr. White, had his reasons for not, I don't know, but it would have been nice to push him a little bit more on these things that you've already talked about. So, yeah, I think that was well said. All right, well, for the rest of the show today, we want to get into briefly, this was actually the latest Supreme Court case, I believe, at least the one that I could access, Tyler versus Hennepin County. And we want to look at this and also look at the issue of property rights, property taxation from a biblical worldview. So I actually want to start this. I want to play a clip from the oral arguments in the Supreme Court case. Just to give a brief background, this was a case of, in Minnesota, a woman was not paying her property taxes. Okay, so I think it had been 3 years, 5 years, I forget the exact amount of time. She did not pay her property taxes. They added fees and fines on top of the property taxes. It came up to like $15,000 she owed, and she wasn't paying it. And so they ended up taking her home. I don't even know if she was living there at the time, but they took her home and they sold it for about $40,000, and then they kept the excess $25,000. And so she ended up suing, and it made it all the way to the Supreme Court. And she ended up winning, I believe, the case that, okay, the state has to give you back your money. But the arguments made are what I really want to address, and also take a look at James Madison's essay on property, written in 1792. So we're kind of continuing the theme here of looking at American history, looking at some of the themes from your book, Luke, The Sound Doctrine of Theocracy, and looking at our system, our constitutional system, and what it has given us. And I think this case, did you listen at all to the oral arguments?
I did not.
Okay.
No. I read the chapter though.
Okay. James Madison.
Yes.
Okay. I'm going to play a clip here. This is the longest clip. I'm not sure if I'll get through all of them, but I want to play this clip because this is Neil Gorsuch, Justice Gorsuch, going back and forth with one of this guy here that's, I guess he's arguing for the state of Minnesota. And I want you to listen especially to when they talk about the feudal lords and the vassals, and just the comparison between how it is today and how it was back then in the 1200s, 1300s. So listen to this clip, and then we'll discuss it.
As the Chief Justice was pointing out, the Virginia statute in 1790...
The Statute of Gloucester. 1292, is that right, Mr. Katyal?
I think 1270,
72,
if I recall.
All right. Well, a funny thing happened after that. It was called the Magna Carta.
Yeah.
And, there's one line in the reply brief that I thought summarized the point pretty well. Let's see here. Apologize, I don't have it right at hand. Yeah. Tyler was not a vassal owing fealty to her lord, but a modern-day fee simple owner of real property. And the Statute of Gloucester was about lands owned by the feudal lord and what happens when a vassal fails to provide enough wheat to his lord, and can his lands, which really belong to the lord, escheat to the lord. And I just don't understand what on earth any of that history has to do with this case.
So, first of all, Justice Gorsuch, they cited the Magna Carta, which was in 1215. In response, we cited a later and more particular statute, the Statute of Gloucester in 1278.
I think Magna Carta was interpreted many, many times thereafter, and we have it in the briefs before us. But you want to, how does the rights of a feudal lord have anything to do with a fee simple case? I just am stuck on that.
Yeah, so we're certainly not arguing that the king's powers are equivalent to the state's after the founding, or that Ms. Tyler is a vassal or anything like that.
Good. I'm glad to hear that. That's progress.
Yes, of course, Justice Gorsuch. We're saying historically, the failure to meet conditions of property ownership, which that tradition of quint rent, which goes all the way back to that statute, at the founding, that was the template. Look at St. George Tucker, which this court isolated.
All right, so that was Neil Gorsuch, and what was his name? Neil Kumar Katyal? That was part of the oral arguments for this case. Okay, so they're arguing back and forth whether or not the state needs to return the $25,000 to this woman. They took her whole property, and then they sold it, and then they kept the excess. But what I wanted to point out from that interaction was, this is what happens so often with these Supreme Court cases. They end up solidifying and ratcheting down man-made law and the system that is unbiblical. So, Joel, the thing that I wanted to, and we actually talked about this in our podcast with Matt Truella, when we read from his article about property rights, property tax. The attorney for the state, he quotes the Statute of Gloucester, and then Gorsuch is like, oh, well, the Magna Carta came later, and he's like, well, actually, no, the Magna Carta came first, which was kind of funny. So they're both appealing to history to make their point, and I guess the plaintiff was appealing to the Magna Carta, saying, we have this right in property, and this guy's like, well, actually, after the Magna Carta, you still had this system where these vassals owed fealty to their to their lord, and they had to pay quit rent. And there's like, oh no, we don't believe in that in America, but don't we? I mean, what's the difference? I mean, he says this is a fee simple owner. I mean, the idea of a fee simple owner is that you own this property outright; it's yours. Is that true? Do we have that in America?
Well, and the attorney actually said it's not true. I love his. To me, it settles on this. We're saying historically, says the lawyer, the failure to meet conditions of property ownership.
Right.
Now, what kind of conditions are we talking about here? Oh, I think I know what kind of conditions of property ownership. But see, it's a contradiction in terms, right? You own this on this condition. Well, if you own something on this condition, then whoever holds the conditions actually owns it. Whoever gets to define the conditions actually owns the property. Mm-hmm. So as far as I'm concerned, he gave away the whole thing at that point. And yeah, what is the difference, right? They had to give, and I love the reference. The serf had to give a certain amount of wheat to the real owner. Let's be honest here.
Right.
The real owner, the Lord, right, in order for him to keep his property. But then we know very quickly it's not his property. And what's the difference between you have to give some wheat or you have to give some money? What's the difference?
Both are labor.
Absolutely. Both are items of value that you give to somebody else in order to keep your property.
Right.
It's not your property.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I want to play another clip. Luke, do you want to say something before I do that? I want to play another clip.
I just want to quote the lawyer here. He says, yes, so we're certainly not arguing that the king's powers are equivalent to the state's after the founding, or that Miss Tyler is a vassal or anything like that. Disagree 100%. Disagree 100%. That's exactly what's happening here. Same exact thing. He says we're not arguing that the king's powers are equivalent to the state's. Yes, they are.
Right.
Yes, they absolutely are. Have you ever heard of an executive order? Yes, they are. The government is making the same exact arguments that the king was making. Hey, I am the voice of God. You got to listen to me. I'm the supreme law of the land. Same freaking thing. Or that Miss Tyler is a vassal or anything. Miss Tyler is a vassal. All taxpayers in this country, we're vassals. If we do not pay our taxes, we get thrown in prison or we lose our property. That's vassalage. Okay, if that's not vassal, I don't know what is.
Yeah, so just to be clear, everybody understand, I think most people know this, but just in case some people listening, if you don't pay your property taxes to the state, they can take your property. Mm-hmm. And that was not see, that's the problem. That came up a lot in these oral arguments, but only to confirm it and agree to it. And so if you do not pay your property to the state, you lose your property tax to the state, you lose your property. How is that different from...
Yes, what's the difference? How is it...
Change the names?
Yeah, right, from feudalism. What's the difference? We're all paying money to the state so we can have our stuff. That's what's going on here. And he's like, well, we're not saying that it's like that. Well, Mr. Neil, they're both named Neil. Yeah. But Mr. Katyal, you are very much incorrect. You should be saying, yes, it's the exact same thing. What's the difference, Your Honor?
Just say it.
Just say it. What's the difference, Your Honor? Functionally, what's the difference? It's just the titles and the names, that's it, and the dates. But the function is the same. If the serf doesn't provide wheat, he loses the property. If the taxpayer doesn't provide taxes, you lose the property. So it's the same exact. We're vassals. We're slaves. We're serfs. It's the same thing.
Yeah. I want to follow up on your point a little bit, though, Chris, and that is that these cases confirm wrong things. In other words, the lady owed $15,000. They sell a property for $40,000. Yeah, and then they keep the $25,000 or whatever, right? And so no, that's not fair. She should get the $25,000. nobody's questioning whether or not she should have owed $15,000 to begin with.
Right.
That's the annoying thing.
Right, and that's the thing that, when these Supreme Court cases happen, and we could talk about a lot of them, people say, oh, this is a win. This is good. This is a step in the right direction. We're moving towards, the civil government not having so much authority. No, we're not, because the ones arguing for the woman here, they're saying, look, we don't question that the state has the right to tax your property and take it from you if you don't pay it. All we're asking for is just this one little thing. Just give us back this $25,000. And so what happens now is this case becomes precedent. So it's going to be that much harder now to say, what, property taxation is wrong, because what they're going to do? They're going to look back to all these cases, and Tyler versus Hennepin County is going to be one of them. They're going to say, this court said.
Yeah.
And the plaintiff and the defendant said, nobody questions that the government has the right to take your property from you.
100%.
And so that's why this is not a win. This constitutional system that we have, it's and I'm going to look at some things Madison said, but this is, I want to play one more clip here. I might do more, but this one is, this is from Justice Roberts. And this basically, Luke, is, I know you didn't get a chance to listen to this whole thing. I've listened to it twice, and it's just, this is basically him saying, you know what? Well, if we can just the states can make whatever law they want. I mean, the states can make a law and say, if you don't pay your property taxes within 1 month, we're going to take all your property and the excess. Like,
saying the quiet part out loud. Here it comes.
Yeah. So here is Justice John G. Roberts Jr.
When was this?
This is April of 2023. This is,
oh boy,
this is the latest, as far as I can tell, the latest Supreme Court oral arguments that have been published. So I don't know if they've taken a long break or if they've done some, they haven't, but this is one of the most recent Supreme Court cases that we have.
Well, I mean, if it's a law, I think you can say that, if you don't pay your taxes within 3 years or whatever it is under state law, you've been deemed to consent to sheeting your property or something to the state. I don't see that it's terribly different. In each case, the property interest is defined by state law.
So that was Justice Roberts, and I think even in the first clip we played, they used that term, a sheeting. Yeah, it's here, and so
skeeting.
A skeeting, yeah. However you say that, and so Roberts here
should be cheating, but anyway.
Yes, Roberts is saying, look, if you make the law, then it's fine. It was wrong under the vassal system, the feudalistic system, because we didn't have our representation. We didn't get to make the laws in. But now if we make a law that says, hey, if you don't pay your fealty to your state, then we'll take your property. And there's many things like that throughout this argument. So it just ratchets down the statism. Now, Madison, okay, in 1792, Madison said that government is instituted to protect property of every sort. Okay. He also said, in the former sense, a man's land or merchandise or money is called his property. Okay, so let's go to the great Mr. Constitution, James Madison, and he's saying, look, and a lot of times, see, Madison and these guys and Payne would say things and they get it right, but then when you read the Constitution, it contradicts what they said.
Yes.
So if Madison's saying that the government is instituted to protect property, how does the government protect property by stealing it? How does the government protect property by saying, if you don't pay us, you lose your property? That doesn't make sense. So, and the other thing Madison says is, where arbitrary taxes invade the domestic sanctuaries of the rich and excessive taxes grind the faces of the poor, he's saying, look, we can have this excess, but what is excessive? What's his standard here?
Yeah.
He has no standard. It's just, hey, the government's going to protect your property, but you know what? If you don't pay us, you lose your property. So that's what this case really is about here. Any other thoughts on that?
The founding fathers, or the framers, I should say, the framers, I think we need to come to terms with the fact that they were playing with fire. They started a flame. They started the flame of tyranny because a lot of them thought that we can do things outside of God's civil structure. We can do things outside of God's law and we'll be okay because I'm not, who knows if it was arrogance or ignorance. For a lot of them it was ignorance, for a lot of them it was arrogance. But this is what happens when you talk a big game, but then, when push comes to shove, you go back to doing the same things that you were trying to fix in the first place. We've gone from, one tyrant 3,000 miles away, 3,000 tyrants 1 mile away. And, as, Mel Gibson said, I keep talking about this, but, a legislature can trample a man's rights just as easily as a king can. and that.
I don't want to stop on that point for a second. I think most people don't believe that.
Yeah, they don't.
I think they believe that somehow if it's a legislature,
Yes, yeah.
it's somehow more protected than with a king.
Yeah, right. So I mean that quote has aged very well. That quote has aged very well. He's 100% correct. The founding fathers were playing with fire when they instituted the Constitution. They just were. They were playing with fire. And the rest of us are getting burned now because of the decisions they made, the things that they decided to institute. It's hurting us. It's hurting us to this day. As you said there, Chris, you included, I think, in the Constitution that, Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution gives Congress the power to, quote, lay and collect taxes, duties, imposts, and excises to pay the debts and provide for the common defense and general welfare, which is a dangerous term, of the United States. This is also referred to as the Taxing and Spending Clause. Okay, that clause has not aged well. That clause has not aged well at all. And definitely, your point, Chris, is the point I was going to make in his thing there from the book about
James Madison.
James Madison.
Yeah,
he says the state's supposed to protect our property. That's why we have it. But if you don't do X, the state doesn't protect your property anymore. What happened to this unconditional love thing? That's gone. But the state has a responsibility, according to Madison, to protect our property. But you can't have the state in its purpose protecting property and compulsory taxation at the same time. They don't exist together. One is going to trample the other. And as we've seen, compulsory taxation has completely trampled the state's duty to protect our property. And that's why I keep going back to this, because I talked to someone at the conference about this. And I was talking to him about the problems with having a legislature in your government. And his point is one I hear often, and I used to think this way too. And his response was, well, it was never supposed to do that. Well, I know it's never supposed to do that, but that's what's happening now. Okay, if I got this brilliant idea and I said, let's start a government, and in this government, instead of having a government far away from everybody making decisions, let's put a representative of the government in everybody's house, and he'll double as a security guard, right, and he'll keep everybody safe. And then 100 years later, we find that the security guards are cheating the families. They're holding them hostage. They're being tyrannical. And I bring up a point and say, hey, maybe this wasn't such a good idea to put a security guard and a government agent in everybody's home. And the response is, well, it was never supposed to be like that. Okay, well and good. It was never supposed to be like that. But let's look at the problem now. Let's get rid of the problem. The problem is that we have a security guard in everybody's house. The problem is that we have a legislature, and I don't care about it was never supposed to be that way. It's just like the socialists. We want welfare and equity for everyone. Okay, well, everyone's dying. Well, it was never supposed to be that way. Okay, that's completely irrelevant to the point. All right, we've got to examine these things in light of biblical law. The only way that we can know that was never supposed to be that way, and it shouldn't be this way now, is because we have a better law that's telling us here's how it's supposed to be. We got to go with that law. We cannot have a source in our country that says here's the law and have a different source that's saying here's the morality. They've got to come from the same source. And statism is taking the source of that law and putting both purviews in it. It's saying the state has the right to tell you what's immoral and what is illegal. That is statism.
Joel?
Yeah.
Well said, Luke. That was great.
Yeah, good rant. Excellent, actually. Just a couple things that the Bible just assumes private property, and it's a sacred thing. For example, if a man shall cause a field or vineyard to be eaten, this is Exodus 22:5, and shall put in his beast and shall feed in another man's field. This is not like collective ownership by the state here. No, one man owns this field, another man owns the other field. And we can't emphasize this enough, that whoever you pay taxes to keep your property, they're the real owners of the property. And we do not see, we do not see state ownership of property under Moses. It's just not there. What we have is state ownership of property. And then we have this, certain maybe church property or whatever is exempt. Okay, but who says it's exempt? if the state says it's exempt, it should be immune, not exempt. But if the state says it's exempt, then now it's still just the state, the state saying, well, who gets to not pay taxes and who does pay taxes, and the state can turn that around at any point. Hasn't done it yet, but doesn't mean that they can't do that. And even just applying the arguments we've already heard this morning from the Supreme Court. Hey, you know what? The government gets to do what it wants here. Exodus 22:6, if a fire break out and catch in thorns so that the stacks of corn or the standing corn of the field be consumed therewith, he that kindle a fire shall surely make restitution. To who? To the state? No. Make restitution to the owner of the field. And then just one more, Leviticus 19:9. And when you reap the harvest of your land, you shall not wholly reap the corners of your field. Neither shall you gather the gleanings of your harvest. The Bible assumes private ownership by private individuals.
And I think it's so interesting that in the curses in Deuteronomy 27, when they're all hanging out on Mount Ebal, one of the curses, it's interesting, none of the curses have anything to do with the ceremonial law. None of them have anything to do with the ceremonial law. But one of the, it's so great. The first curse is the man who makes a graven image or a molten image, an abomination to Yahweh, the work of the hands of the craftsman, and sets it up in secret. And all the people shall answer and say, Amen. That's the first one. Second one, cursed is he who dishonors his father or mother. And all the people shall say, Amen. The third one, cursed is he who moves his neighbor's boundary mark. And all the people shall say, Amen. Number 3, do not mess with your neighbor's private property. And that is exactly what the state is doing when they kick you out of your house. Cursed is the state for moving their neighbor's boundary mark, and by so doing, cursed is he who perverts the justice to a sojourner, orphan, and widow. And cursed is the state. Our state is cursed. A curse upon you, state, for attacking your neighbor's property and moving the boundary mark, because when you kick someone out of their house, you're moving their boundary mark and saying, you cannot come here anymore. And cursed are you for doing that.
Man, you're doing worse than moving the boundary marker, like subtly as you can't see it.
Right.
You're doing worse.
Taking the whole thing.
You're saying, you have no more property at all.
Yeah.
Now, Madison said, speaking of property, he said, this term is in its particular application means that that dominion which one man claims and exercises over the external things of the world in exclusion of every other individual.
In exclusion.
It's his.
Yeah.
He goes on.
Which I think is a fine definition.
Yeah, I mean, he's right here.
Yeah.
I mean, I wouldn't know. Let me keep reading. He says, in its larger and juster meaning, it embraces everything to which a man may attach a value and have a right, and which leaves to everyone else the like advantage. In the former sense, this is what I read earlier, in the former sense, a man's land or merchandise or money is called his property. Mm-hmm. It's his. He claims it, and he exercises over it his rights. So then when we have the Constitution saying that the government can tax you, and listen to what Hamilton said. Hamilton said money, and again, remember Madison saying money is your property. Hamilton said money is with propriety considered as the vital principle of the body politic, a complete power. Listen to that, a complete power, therefore, to procure a regular and adequate supply of it, as far as the resources of the community will permit, may be regarded as an indispensable ingredient in every constitution. I mean, there you have Locke's supreme power to make law, Hamilton's complete power to tax and get money. That's the U.S. Constitution for you. So Madison and some of these guys were right in some of the essays and things they wrote, talking about property and how sacred it is. But then they ain't jiving. They're either hypocrites or they were very confused and didn't see the inconsistency in their own arguments. And that's what we have today with conservatism. Hey, we're all about freedom and private. Well, then be consistent with that, right? And don't support a system that flies in the face of those things,
right?
Okay. So, do we have kind of a problem here? The heresy that Chris now is putting forth. He is questioning some founders and some founders' document, specifically the Constitution. Now, when I call Chris a heretic for that, am I doing so with the idea that we have actually, not in our doctrinal statements here, but practically and actually, if you will, substitute the Constitution for the Bible, in that, yes, specifically, we're not allowed to question the Bible, but if the Constitution is over the Bible, have we not switched our idea of inerrancy, if you will, and ultimate authority from the Scriptures to the Constitution?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, that's how we function in this nation. The supreme law of the land is the Constitution.
And I'm talking about Christians now.
Yeah, Christian. Oh, yes, absolutely. Christians function.
Well,
like
I'm not going to play this clip. I do want to play some more, but this is from Justice Alito from the same oral argument. He said, so where do we look if we don't look to the understanding of property interests at the time of the adoption of the Constitution? Where do we look?
No place else.
I got it. Yeah, it's no place else.
That's the only place we can look.
Yeah.
I mean, that to me, that was a, I mean, obviously we knew that, but it's just fun. Hey, we can't look anywhere else other than American history and English history. We can't go to the Bible.
Yeah.
That would be insane.
And again, I think your average Christian, though, would definitely agree with Alito on that point.
Right.
Bible schmibel at this point.
Right. And so the issue of forced taxation, I mean, this is related to it because that's one of the things that many Christians who would agree with a lot of what we're saying will say, well, no, the state has to be able to force you to pay taxes.
Yeah.
And if you don't pay, you should be penalized. I mean, I don't know what...
We cannot imagine a situation where the state is not slapping you around if you don't pay your taxes. That's unimaginable.
Right. Now, and if you just simply go to the Constitution and history of fallen man, then yeah, you can make a fine case for the government locking people up, I don't know, executing them. I mean, all these penalties for not paying their taxes. But if you go to the Bible, you get a different picture. But this is the problem with the American system. We don't look to the Bible. We look to precedent. We look to and often we're looking to fallen man's humanistic measures. So it shouldn't surprise us that as the gospel still has a lot of work to do. But if we're going to look back and say, well, let's look at all the times people didn't follow the Bible and let's have that be our precedent, like we're going to continue down this path of tyranny. And again, forced taxation, the state saying, if you don't pay this, we will punish you, violates the Bible. It violates what Madison said himself. Yeah. Of course, it violates God's word, which is the ultimate standard. So I want to play actually two more clips because these clips are great because a lot of times I didn't realize all these, until a few months ago, I started listening to these Supreme Court arguments, and it's very telling to listen to them. So this is the lawyer for the woman who wanted her money back, her $25,000. And she's going to say, I got two clips from her basically saying, look, feudalism's been rejected in this nation. Like she's agreeing with the other people. And then she's saying, of course the government can tax and take my client's property. Of course, I'm not questioning that. So here's one, and then I'll play the other one.
I mean, I think it would ultimately be irrelevant even if you were correct. I think the whole opinion is good. I think Justice Viviano's concurrence in Raffaelli also discusses the history of the mortgager's interest, but ultimately it's irrelevant because in the tax collection context, it goes all the way back to Magna Carta that the government could not take more than it was owed. And while, the county has pointed out that there were some feudal practices associated at the time prior to the founding, there were feudalism practices with the Statute of Gloucester and with quit rent. That was not tax collection. That was the feudal practice of a lord who his tenants owed him fealty, services, or rent. And this country outright rejected such practices. So I think when you look at the history of tax collection, it's very clear that there were limits on how much could be taken throughout our nation's history, and then also dating all the way back to Magna Carta.
All right, so there she's saying, look, yeah, our country's rejected this system. The government can only take what it's owed.
Yeah, was she arguing for a client or was she arguing for the government there?
Yeah, it's true.
I mean, the government can take what they're owed. Who determines what the government's owed?
Yeah,
we're not neck deep in statism. We're drowning. In statism. We're just drowning. We can't think outside of it. We can't think out of statist paradigms. We just can't.
And she's accepting the entire statist paradigm. But I love what she said there too. That wasn't taxes, but it was but this fealty was owed. Oh, I'm so glad it wasn't taxes. Then what was it?
Right. All right. This is the last clip I have. This is the same woman. And again, she's going to basically say, you know what? Yeah, the government can take whatever's owed them is theirs.
And so we do not contest the government. Certainly the government can tack on penalties, interest, and fees, and they can forcibly sell it and take their cut. But when you just attempt to take everything left over after that, that's taking.
All right, so she's like, we're not questioning the government. Not only can the government tax your property, force you to pay it, if not, take your land from you. They can also add on penalties, interest, and fees if you don't pay. So again, I ask, and to our listeners, how is this fundamentally different than feudalism and the vassal and his lord? Maybe it's worse. I don't know. I mean, so this is what happens when you abandon biblical law. And again, to give the government the authority to make man-made law, and then with that, the authority to force you to pay them money to give us your property. I mean, Madison said your money's your property. It's going by Madison here. Give us your property or else we will lock you up. We'll take it from you.
There's no principal difference here because she owes $15,000, right? Well, what if she owes $40,000 according to the state? The state could collect $40,000 and then there's no case at all.
And that was a big part of the oral argument. If you listen to the whole thing, it's like an hour and a half. They're like, well, we could just make a different penalty here. And she's just, bobbing and weaving. Well, yeah, it might be excessive, but in the end, it's like, as long as it's fair and it's not based on this specific case and they're not trying to punish this plaintiff, yeah, the state could make, other penalties.
Yeah, as long as it falls under the purview here of what Hamilton said, as far as the resources of the community will permit. Well, what the heck does that mean? Who decides? That
means if I still have a crumb left on my table,
you're fine.
I guess I have resources.
As they say,
you can take everything else.
In North Korea, are you dead? Did you die? Well, then you can permit more. All right, as long as are you still alive? Yes. Okay, then you can give more. That's the question in North Korea. Did you die? No. Okay, then I get everything else. You're still alive. So I mean that's what you could define as what the resources of community will permit. That is a dangerous thing for people who are in power to define for you.
When in the Pilgrim's Progress, when Christian, and Pliable, they take off, right, and their first big obstacle is this swamp, and a swamp is intriguing here because it's like how do you get out of it? You don't even know hardly how you got into it. And that's what happens here when you get away from the Bible here. Slowly, you get in this swamp and you get in these, you don't know how to get out. So you get, well, are we in the swamp that bad? Let's only take away what's fair. And there's no way to know. You're in a swamp here. There's no way to know how to get out of that without a clear word from God.
What is it? The slough of despond?
Yeah.
Is that how you say it? Slough?
Slough or slough. Yeah.
Despond.
Yeah. So despond. You said we're not neck deep in statism. We're drowning in it. So it's the swamp of statism now.
Yeah.
The slough of statism.
And I challenge anybody to get out of it. I mean, in our patriot groups or Republican groups and so forth, I challenge anyone to get out of it without going to the scriptures.
Yeah.
You're not going to do it.
Yeah, and this is this is probably not the best example of Supreme Court. It's way at the high level. We need to work local. But here's an example of this is not a win, right? This is not a win. What would have been a win would have been even if you lost this case, but you challenged their foundation. Yep. You challenge you are arguing.
You're getting nowhere without challenging the foundation.
Yeah, you're not only getting nowhere, you're making things worse. You're making it that much harder. And it was the same thing with the case we talked about, Gerald Groff. Like you're not challenging the foundation here that man made a law and man's sinful example is the standard of justice. That is what the U.S. Constitution gives us. It's not just simply a byproduct of it. That is the system. Hey, we're going to make our own laws, and then we're going to, analyze them ourselves. And now we're going to look at precedent and see how man has messed it up before.
Chris, if I'm a statist, you know how I fix this? This is easy. She only owed $15,000. Next time, we're going to make sure she owes $40,000.
Right.
That's how I'm going to fix it.
And I think most of that money was actually, fees and penalties.
Yeah.
It wasn't even the taxation. So what a complete mess. All right, we're going to wrap up now. Final words, Luke, on this topic. I know you have a chapter on taxation in your book, The Sound Doctrine of Theocracy. If you do not have that book, get a copy of The Sound Doctrine of Theocracy by Luke Saint. Great book. You were able to sell some copies and get that around at the conference too.
Yes.
So what are your final thoughts on today?
Going back to the founding of this nation or the framing of the Constitution, both quotes you have by Hamilton and Madison indicates that these guys were indeed playing with fire. When you start to get into vague terminology of as far as the resources of the community will permit, you are playing. I mean, you may as well have a lighter in your right hand and a stick of dynamite in your left hand and just passing it over, seeing if it's going to light. I mean, that's the same thing in my book. You know, you start to get in this vague terminology. You're gambling with people's lives now. You're gambling with people's lives when you take the law and you become a law unto yourself. You're gambling with people's lives. And as history has shown, they were gambling with the lives of innocent children when they established things that they should not have established. When they went outside of God's realm and into the realm of statism, you know, as well-intentioned as many of them were, they were playing with fire. It is dangerous. It is destructive. The Bible says, trust in the Lord with all of your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In all of your ways, acknowledge him. That's not just for me in my little house, in my own little heart. That's for governments too. In all of your ways, acknowledge him. Our founding fathers, our framers, did not do that. They did not acknowledge him. They acknowledge him in some of their ways. But the Bible doesn't say acknowledge him in some of your ways. It says acknowledge him in all of your ways. And they were playing with fire, and their descendants are being burned to death.
Well said. Joel.
Yeah, from Matthew 13:44, again, the kingdom of heaven is like unto treasure hid in a field, which when a man hath found, he hides, and his for joy thereof, and sells all that he has, and buys that field. Now, if he buys the field and there's treasure in the field, does he get all the treasure in the field, or does he somehow owe to somebody else a percentage of that treasure? No,
that parable wouldn't work in modern America.
No, it would not. It would not, because we cannot conceive of outright fee simple ownership. This is my field, and no one else has any claim on this field whatsoever.
Every man under his vine.
Yes, and under his vine and under his fig tree.
Yeah, it's an illusion. I mean, we don't believe in the feudal practices anymore.
Oh no, not us.
It's an illusion. It's just like we're not those barbarians in the past who sacrifice people. We don't do that today.
Not us.
Yeah,
not us.
But we do at Planned Parenthood.
Yeah.
But we are in a vassal state, because if you don't pay your money to your lord, they take your property. Mm-hmm. So it's this. I mean, you see it so much. This intentional deception using language, and it's not true. Like we are the land of the free. No, we're not. Mm-mm. No, and we can be thankful that we may not be as far along as some other places. That's true. But if we keep saying that, what is the word doesn't mean anything anymore. So we don't own our land in America. The state does. Well, again, for more information on Luke Saint, just go get his book, The Sound Doctrine of Theocracy. You can get that at Amazon paperback, and there's an ebook option I saw on there.
Yes. And hopefully next week we'll have the audiobook.
Okay. Is recording in process? Like, is it?
I think this weekend we're going to try and start recording.
Okay. So go get The Sound Doctrine of Theocracy by Luke Saint. For more information about Joel Saint, you can go to irbc.church or search Joel Saint on Sermon Audio. If you are a patron, stick around. We'll have a brief after show where Joel and I will discuss these concepts a little bit more. If you'd like to support the show, go to patreon.com/The Lancaster Patriot and sign up to be a patron today. Thank you so much for listening. Until next time, remember, Christ, not the Constitution, is king. So long.
Amen.